Well, it wasn't exactly the Love Boat, but we did have a nice view from our stateroom window. The beds were comfortable, and we had most of the comforts of home. We were booked on a 7-day cruise of the Aegean, which departed from Athens, Greece on the first day, to arrive the following afternoon in Istanbul, Turkey, then depart the third day for the island of Mykonos. On the fourth day, we would visit the island of Patmos and tour the ruins of ancient Ephesus back on the Turkish mainland. Following that, we would visit the island of Rhodes on day 5, and then down to Crete and the volcanic island of Santorini on day 6 before heading back to Athens. Early Saturday afternoon, the Cristal docked at Istanbul, and 2 fun-filled days of shore excursions began. Our first guided tour was to Hagia Sophia, which is now a museum and one of the most glorious monuments of the Byzantine Empire. Originally a church built in the 6th century, it was converted into a mosque by the Turks after the conquest of 1453. Next, our guide brought us to the Grand Bazaar, and my wife, Billy, got a chance to do what she does best: shop.
Don't like it?
120.
I have different. Yes. 70. And my sister, believe me, small working. Small. Just is very hard working. Super special. Okay, 60 I give you, no problem.
Later that night, we went ashore again for Istanbul at night for dinner and a show. There were lots of beautiful belly dancers. Early the next morning, it was out again to visit the Blue Mosque. That afternoon, the Cristal departed Istanbul and returned down the Sea of Marmara to the Aegean. Then, the Cristal sailed south towards our next port of call, the island of Mykonos, the following evening. But because the boat arrived late in Mykonos, and because, quite frankly, we were worn out from running around Istanbul, we stayed on the ship at Mykonos and rested, and got ourselves ready for the next day's arrival at the island of Patmos. The Greeks considered Patmos as a holy island. Below its Acropolis, the monastery of St. John, is a cave where St. John received the revelation of Jesus Christ about 90 AD. And to visit this very grotto was one of the reasons we booked this particular cruise. Photography in the grotto was forbidden, so we had the camera running, but had to be discreet about framing the shots. Our pilgrimage to Patmos was very brief, but well worth it. Soon the Cristal departed and was now on its way back to the Turkish mainland, and our next short excursion, a visit to the ruins of the ancient biblical city of Ephesus. There is something a little spooky about walking through the ruins of what 2,000 years ago was a bustling Asia Minor port city, especially when that city is so prominently mentioned in Bible prophecy. In the book of Revelation, Ephesus was the first of the 7 churches. This was the church that was said to have left its first love, and that the Lord would remove its candlestick unless it repented. Now, about 1900 years later, this is all that remains of that once great city. It was eventually abandoned after the harbor silted up and the seashore removed to about 4 miles away. Malaria also played a big part in the city's final demise. Ephesus is also spoken about in chapter 19 of the book of Acts as the place of the famous temple of the goddess Diana. The Apostle Paul also preached in the streets and marketplaces of this city. And when the local craftsmen perceived Paul's preaching about Jesus as a threat to their livelihood of making and selling silver images of Diana, the merchants stirred up all the townsfolk, and everyone poured into the city theater in wrath and confusion. Well, this is that very theater. After about a 2-hour uproar, a wise town clerk appeased the crowd and dismissed them, and Paul and his companions departed and continued on their way to Macedonia. And after we departed, we reboarded the Cristal and headed for Rhodes. The next morning on Rhodes, our first excursion was to Lindos, the original port city of the island. The view from atop the town's Acropolis is breathtaking, but it's quite a climb from the main town down below. Most of our group walked up. However, Billy and I had been here 10 years before, and we knew there were donkeys available and where to find them. Which brings us to future filmmakers tip number 1. Never try to film from the back of a moving jackass. It's just not pretty. Yes, the view from atop the Acropolis at Lindos was stunning. But it was soon time to return to the buses, and our next stop, the Old Town in Rhodes. The medieval Old Town of Rhodes is a bustling neighborhood of some 6,000 people who live and work in the same buildings in which the Knights of St. John lived 6 centuries ago. Today it's filled with shops, and throughout the season, tourists by the thousands. After the tour, we returned to do some shopping, and Billy interacted with some of the locals. Overnight, the Cristal sailed west from Rhodes. The next morning at sunrise, we docked at Port St. Nicholas on the island of Crete. And about an hour later, we arrived at the ruins of the ancient palace of Knossos. Knossos was the capital of the ancient Minoan Empire. It was damaged several times in its history by earthquakes, invasions, and most notably in 1450 BC by the colossal volcanic eruption of the nearby island of Thera, which today is called Santorini, by the way, and we will visit that next. A British archaeologist named Arthur Evans excavated Knossos in 1900, restoring large parts of the palace in a way that allows visitors today to better appreciate and visualize its former grandeur. Seeing its complex multi-story buildings and connecting systems allows one to comprehend why the Palace of Knossos was associated with the mythological labyrinth and the half-man, half-bull creature of legend called the Minotaur. Following our visit to Knossos, it was back to the boat and a 3-hour sailing to that island once called Thera, the one I was telling you about, where the volcano erupted. Well, today, what remains of that island is called Santorini. Before we continue, a quick course in volcanology concerning caldera-type eruptions. When the volcanic island of Thera exploded, most of the island was blown away, and the remains collapsed into the caldera basin, much of which is now underwater. Thousands of years later, cruise ships would visit the modern-day island, now called Santorini, and use this as a harbor. How big is this caldera? Well, I think this shot will give you some perspective. The Cristal dropped anchor in the caldera, and those going ashore soon loaded into tender boats, which then raced across the deep blue waters to the port docks. From there, we boarded buses, which drove us up a zigzag road over 1,000 feet to the top of the rim. And shortly thereafter, we arrived at Oia village, where we soon found a rooftop restaurant and got that magnificent panoramic view of the caldera. After some refreshments, it was off again for some shopping and sightseeing. Do you by any chance have a brother that lives over on Rhodes? No, I guess not. Soon it was time to return to the ship, and we took a high-speed cable car to get us back down to sea level. It was quite a ride. As the sun began to set, we reboarded the tender boats, which then slowly took us back out to the Cristal. Santorini was our last port of call. Early the next morning, the Cristal would return to Athens, and our week of cruising would be over. It was a great adventure, filled with memories that will last a lifetime. We had fun.